You wake up to an alarm that has no relationship to sunlight. You commute to a place you didn't choose. To do work you'd probably stop doing tomorrow if the money stopped. 8 hours pass. You come home tired in a way that doesn't quite make sense because you didn't build anything, hunt anything, carry anything heavy across a landscape. You just sat and answered messages, and somehow that was exhausting too. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a question keeps surfacing. Quiet, persistent. What if this isn't actually how humans are supposed to live? Here's a fact that should stop you cold. For over 95% of the time our species has existed, nobody had a job. Not a bad job, not a good job. No job at all. No concept of one. And somehow, without careers or calendars or quarterly targets, those people built the entire foundation of everything you now call civilization. So what were they actually doing with their days? The image you've probably absorbed without ever choosing to is grim. A hunched, filthy figure, dragging a club, one bad injury away from death, every hour consumed by the desperate hunt for the next meal. That image has a name and philosophy. It comes from Thomas Hobbes, a man writing in the 1600s who never once observed a hunter-gatherer band in his life. He needed humanity to look terrifying without kings to control it. So he wrote it that way, and the myth outlived the motive. The actual research tells a different story, and it doesn't come from guesswork. In the 1960s, anthropologist Richard Lee lived among the Dobe Jew/Huansi of the Kalahari and simply counted hours. He tracked exactly how long people spent finding food, building shelter, meeting basic needs. The number he kept landing on was somewhere between 2 and 5 hours a day. Not 8, not 10 with a commute stapled on. 2 to 5. Now here's where it gets stranger, and this is the part almost nobody talks about. You might assume that even with a short work day, foraging for your food must have burned enormous amounts of energy compared to sitting in an office. In 2012, a researcher named Herman Ponser strapped monitors onto the Hadza people of Tanzania and measured with real precision how many calories their bodies actually burned across a full day of hunting, digging, walking, climbing. The results stunned the entire field. Total daily energy expenditure came out almost identical to a sedentary adult in the United States. Your body, it turns out, quietly compensates. Work harder in one area and something else inside you throttles down to balance the books. Which means the 2 to 5 hour figure isn't even the most surprising part. The most surprising part is that ancient life may not have felt like a grind at all. It may have felt, metabolically and rhythmically, closer to balance than anything you're living right now. So if their hours weren't consumed by survival, what filled them instead? The answer starts with something you already know intuitively but rarely name. Other people. Not as a nice to have, as the actual infrastructure of staying alive. Ancient humans lived in bands of maybe 20 to 50 people, and within that small world, everyone's inner life mattered in a way it simply doesn't in a city of 8 million strangers. Knowing who was reliable, who was funny, who quietly resented you, who would share the last of the water. That knowledge kept you alive. Reading people wasn't a soft skill. It was the skill. This is why they talk so much. Anthropologists studying surviving hunter-gatherer groups describe conversation as almost constant, and mostly about nothing you'd call important. Who did what? Who's annoyed at whom? The evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar has a theory about this that reframes the whole habit. Language, he argues, evolved as a replacement for physical grooming. Chimpanzees pick lice from each other's fur to build trust. Humans got too many friends and not enough hours in the day for that, so we started using words instead. Which means that 3-hour phone call that covered absolutely nothing of substance? That's not wasted time. That's an ancient, load-bearing behavior wearing a modern disguise. Then there's music, and the timeline here should genuinely unsettle you. Archaeologists have pulled flutes carved from vulture bone and mammoth ivory out of caves in Germany, dated to roughly 40,000 years old. Writing is about 5,000 years old. Agriculture, 10,000. Humans were making music for tens of thousands of years before either of those things existed. And it wasn't performance. There was no stage, no audience, no algorithm deciding who got heard. If you wanted music, you made it alongside everyone else, around a fire, as one body of sound rather than a broadcast. Art tells the same story from a different angle. The horse paintings in Chauvet Cave in France are so precise, so alive with implied movement, that when the filmmaker Werner Herzog first saw them, he said they looked freshly painted. They're 36,000 years old, and many of these paintings sit deep inside cave systems through narrow, dangerous passages in total darkness, locations that took real effort and risk to reach. That's not decoration, that's ritual. That's a species reaching for something beyond the next meal, long before anyone had a word for religion. And then, strangest of all to modern ears, they mocked success on purpose. Among the Kalahari's Kung San people, a hunter who returns proud from a big kill isn't praised. He's teased relentlessly about how disappointing and scrawny the animal actually looks. He's expected to agree, to deflate himself, to laugh along. Anthropologists call this practice insulting the meat, and it isn't just humor. It's a social pressure valve, a built-in mechanism that stops confidence from calcifying into hierarchy, stops hierarchy from calcifying into the kind of permanent inequality that eventually produces kings and everyone beneath them. Laughter, in this light, wasn't entertainment, it was government. Now consider the hours you're not even conscious for, because those change too. Before artificial light existed, humans didn't sleep in one unbroken 8-hour block. The historian Roger Ekirch spent 16 years combing through diaries, court records, and old medical texts, and found repeated references to something called first sleep and second sleep, two segments of rest split by an hour or so of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. This wasn't insomnia, it was expected. People use that window to talk, think, have sex, visit neighbors. Sources describe it as a period of unusual mental clarity. And here's the part that should hit close to home. When modern sleep researchers put people in total darkness for weeks with no artificial light at all, their sleep spontaneously splits back into that same two-part pattern. That maddening 3 a.m. wakefulness you call insomnia might not be malfunctioning. It might be your body trying to run software that's still, underneath everything, 300,000 years old. Then farming arrived, roughly 10,000 years ago, and the archaeological record shows something nobody expects. Skeletons from early farming communities are shorter than their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Teeth show more decay. Bones show repetitive strain from crouching over crops for hours. Height is one of the most reliable proxies historians have for overall nutrition and health, and it dropped. Farming created surplus, and surplus eventually built cities and writing and medicine. But the individual person living through that transition, eating a narrower diet and bending over a field all day, was very likely worse off than their ancestors had been. So how did knowledge survive across generations without any of that surplus, without schools or books? Story. Everything worth remembering got wrapped in narrative, myth, and song because a story sticks in memory in a way a list of facts never does. And this wasn't a crude workaround for lacking writing. In some ways, it outperformed it. Indigenous Australian oral traditions describe coastline changes and volcanic events from more than 10,000 years ago with real geological accuracy, carried intact across roughly 400 generations with no written word at all because the stories were bound to landscape, ceremony, and community. Which raises a real evolutionary question. Why did humans evolve such long lives past their reproductive years in the first place, when most animals don't? Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, studying the Hadza, proposed an answer now known as the grandmother hypothesis. Older women who could no longer bear children still had enormous value. Provisioning grandchildren, freeing up mothers to have more offspring sooner, and passing down decades of ecological and social knowledge. Hawkes's argument is that menopause itself, and the unusually long human lifespan that follows it, may have evolved specifically because knowledge transmission was that valuable to survival. Your elders weren't a burden to be managed. They were, quite literally, why your species could afford to keep learning. Here's where all of this turns into a mirror pointed straight at your own life.